Okay, folks, I think it's close enough. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is our fifth, maybe? Is that right? Fifth? I think our fifth public meeting. Better keep track. I'd like to start out by taking a look at the minutes that I think were distributed, some last week and some this week. There are two sets of minutes on the table because we didn't get around to it last week. The minutes for April 24th, 2012. Anybody have any comments or corrections?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have the minutes insofar as the April 24 meeting and the May 1 meeting are concerned, are in my view correct, and I'm going to move in a minute to that they be adopted. But there is in the April 24 minutes a motion that was made and passed that doesn't, I think, accurately reflect what we decided, and so I'm going to what we meant to decide is what I should say. So I'm going to, when we get to the search for executive director discussion, propose a clarification of that.
Okay, but let the minutes stand as they are.
The minutes stand because they accurately reflect what we did.
Okay. Oh, you mean we meant to do something different?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was my motion, and I didn't capture in exactly what we should have been doing.
Okay. If we're looking,
so I'd move. So I would, unless there's further discussion.
On May 1st, as we're looking at both of them, there are two corrections that I saw on May 1st. One is the economic development form that Commissioner Stebbins is working on is June 14th, not 13th.
All right.
And also under the Racing Commission write-up, I think there's just a typo. There's a double not. So in line 10 under the Racing Commission, I think the word not appears
twice.
Yeah, not right next to each other, but it says we were
twice in the same sentence.
Yeah,
all right.
All right. Okay. Other than that, does somebody want to move on the minutes? You want, Commissioner?
Well, then I'll move. Let's deal with them seriatim. I'll move that the April 24, 2012 minutes be adopted as promulgated.
Second.
Any more conversation? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Nay. The ayes have it.
And then I would move that the May 1, 2012 minutes be approved with the correction of June 13 to June 14 and the elimination of two nots in the same sentence.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, I just wanted to say one thing to members of the press about we will be trying, as we've talked about before, to pass out, make available for attachments that we're talking about. And there may be times, for some reason or other, we can't do that. It's everything will be posted on the website for everybody the next day. But it's just be aware that these are, they have no formal substantive value at all. They're just background data. They're not our own work papers even, unless we specify something. But I just wanted to make it, you're welcome to have them. We're anxious to make the meeting as useful as possible to the members of the press, and it's too late to get them to you tomorrow. But I just want to make sure that you're sort of sensitive about what's in there, because it's very much preliminary stuff for the most part. Okay, let's go to item number 3, administration. Commissioner McHugh, you had something on the search for the executive director. As far as the search, what's the status of the RFP?
They're due this Friday by 3 p.m.
Okay. So okay. And do we have some in?
This time we haven't received any.
Haven't received any?
I haven't received any, no. My experience is that people wait till the last minute.
Yeah.
But we've had 2 different firms ask questions. They were very procedural relative to obtaining forms on Compass.
Right, okay.
Which we answered. And because they were procedural, we did not post as part of the Compass questions that the RFR allows for.
Okay. And while we're talking about this, I think you were going to be working on evaluation criteria.
Yes.
What's the status of
Yep.
that?
We're meeting with people of our appointing authorities, as we discussed last meeting that we talked about this. Treasurer's Office, Governor's Office, and AG's Office, as well as Janice and myself will be meeting tomorrow with those people to lay out the evaluation criteria that's stipulated in the RFR. The assumption is that we will then review however many come in and meet for a second time to discuss and then subsequently interview
Okay.
the however many firms we decide to interview. I decide to interview.
Okay. And we're expecting this to be done, we hope, by the end of the month?
That's the timeline, and I think it's doable.
Okay.
We also, as we discussed last meeting, working with our consultant Spectrum, and Michael and Carol have kind of got them moving, since part of their work plan was to assist us with short-term hiring needs. They're going to help us prepare a job profile, as well as come up with an inventory of publications, media avenues. So we're saving our eventual vendor, and I talked about this with Commissioner Zuniga, we're saving our vendor that time that they don't need to kind of play catch-up. So hopefully we'll have a job profile that perhaps we can even approve or consider at our meeting next week.
That'd be great, because usually there's a week or two taken up writing the job description, so
Right.
that'd be great. Okay, Commissioner McHugh, you had something that,
I did, Mr. Chairman. Last, on April 24th, I made a motion that Commissioner Zuniga put together a task force to help him select the search firm finalist or finalists. That was imprecise, as the discussion that motion followed reflects. And the motion should have been a motion that Commissioner Zuniga be charged with making a recommendation as to a search firm, assisted by whatever group he chose to assemble to give him advice. But the clear intent of the discussion, and now of the motion that I make, is to repose in him the judgment and responsibility for making a recommendation to the rest of the committee. So I'd now, to square the corners, move that he be charged with making that recommendation, and that he be charged with putting together such group as he thinks is helpful to give him the advice that he needs in order to make the recommendation.
similar to the role that I played on the communications person.
Right.
Yeah. Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it unanimously. Okay, that's great. We do have, I guess we've got some ideas already of candidates, and that we will give to the search firm when we're gonna do the full McGill of a real serious search. But we know people know we're looking and are already giving us some ideas, which is good. Okay, item 3B, the Public Information Officer, just a quick update on that. I have closed the loop with Elaine Driscoll. She definitely is coming on board. I said to her, please treat the police department appropriately, and, we'll wait. If we'd like it tomorrow, but we'll wait for however long is appropriate. She talked with Commissioner Davis, and she will be starting 3 weeks from Monday, which is a holiday, so it's 3 weeks from Tuesday, May 29th. And she'll be working with us. She may be in touch with Janice already to get the paperwork flowing, and she said she's available to work with us. Karen has talked with her, and there may be some small amount of communication, but basically I think we need to leave her alone while she finishes up the job with BPD. Everything we continue to hear about her and in the transactions we have with her suggests that she will be tough, smart, capable person. Not that we have any PR needs at all. Okay, anything else on that? Other hiring needs, we've got, I think it's 4. Did we put out a 5th for a financial person? No, not yet. Okay, so we have 4 jobs posted. They're posted everywhere. They're in the normal state places, but they're also in Monster and everything. I'm told by Janice that we've received over 600 applications. So we're moving quickly down that road there. We're going to pretty much close that down now, right? Close down the application time, and then just get moving. And Janice will be working with Stan and also Commissioner Zuniga to some extent to work out, what priorities do we have. But we're starting to feel the crunch that we need some more sort of mid-level administrative support. So that'll be coming soon. Gaming consultant status, and also, for that matter, the outside counsel. I think the background checks have been completed and
satisfactorily completed with no issues that should preclude us from moving forward with the consultants.
Okay, great. And these were done on our behest by the state police?
Correct.
Right, okay. The gaming consultants, we have Guy Michael here from Michael and Carol, who was going to be talking about the RFQ idea. We've now put Acting Executive Director McGee in touch with Kathy O'Toole, who is the point person on the consultant side, to finalize the statement of work and get a contract going as soon as possible. We're starting to use the consultants for substantive work already today, which is fine. We can do that, but we do need to process that statement of work as quickly as we possibly can, and Stan is on that. I'm happy to say I'm not. Outside counsel, Commissioner McHugh, anything else on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We are near completion of the contract with outside counsel. That has not been assigned. The statement of work is completed, but there were a couple of terms that we were working on. We've resolved those. I expect that contract to be completed this week. The outside counsel have given us, as we discussed at prior meetings, a framework for their work, that is the statement, ultimately the statement of work. They have completed their review and the assessment of the statute and have given me a draft document which I'm going to review this week. I got it yesterday. It is comprehensive, and then I will, if there are any corrections, ask them to make it and distribute it to all of you later this week. It's, I think, a very helpful guide through the various components of the statute. In that connection, they have created a number of appendices, and one of the nice things about what they've done is that the organization can be sorted and organized in any way that we want. So you can take, it's a plastic chart in effect, it's electronic, and one can sort it in various ways. So they have separated out, for starters, the various funds for which we have some responsibility, the various advisory boards. Right. There are 7 advisory boards, and they've listed all of their functions, and right. and they have also indicated all the regulations we're responsible for promulgating. So this is a real blueprint as to how to get through this. They've also given me a draft policy on policies. Sounds like a title of a novel there, but we've talked about this before too, what things we ought to do by bylaws, what things we ought to do by regulations, what things we ought to do by policies. And so I'll have that ready for distribution later this week as well. And finally, and I know Commissioner Cameron will talk about this later, they've prepared and thought through and helped us with emergency regulations for the transition to the racing group. So we are on track, I think, and can now proceed, once we get these preliminaries finished, to have them help us put into place the other structural pieces that we need to stand up the commission. We need to have, and we'll work on this week, an integration between what they're doing and the recommendations by the gaming consultants, so that we can coordinate the structural regulations that govern us and will govern others, and the gaming regulations, and make sure that we're sequencing things in the appropriate fashion so that we're doing the first things first and putting in place the foundation blocks on which to build. So that's my report, and that's where we are, and I think we're in good shape.
That's great. That's a lot of work that
they have done a lot of work, yeah. And they've been the work is very good and very thoughtful and user-friendly, I think.
That's great.
We'll see.
That will fit pretty quickly into it does interface with the work that the other consultant is doing, you know, and because they're on their strategic plan and workflow chart and so forth. So probably getting those two together as soon as possible is good. That's great. Anything else on the outside counsel issues or contract issues in general? Nothing more on the permanent meeting date. We're still working, I guess. Have we decided on this place? Not quite.
Next week we'll be back at the convention center, but after that, most meetings will take place here.
Okay.
At 1 o'clock.
And we're still working on trying to figure out a cost-efficient way to do the live streaming. This one is not being live. It will be up on video tomorrow on the website as it was last week. You've heard me talk about this all the time, folks who are visiting. We're committed to making these things streamed live. Although the viewership has been pretty modest, I think it's right to say that we think that if we can do it for a reasonable price, there's a principle to it of transparency and access to people who are not in Boston that is important. So, but we still haven't figured out a cost-efficient way to do that yet, but we're working on it. And we'll get to that as quickly as we can. So next week is back at the convention center. The week after that is back here. Okay. And we do anticipate having a meeting every Tuesday for a while coming. Finance and budget update, Commissioner Zuniga.
Yep, thank you. There was a chart like this in the packets relative to the costs that have been expended through MARS, the state accounting system. There's 2 columns in this report. The second to last column is the encumbered amount, which I will speak to in a little bit. And the total expenditure amount is the last column of this report. That's essentially the checks or EFTs really that have gone out by category. My intention is to start reporting on the finance at the end of each month. In other words, a meeting like today, reporting on the recently closed April, and continue to do that for the foreseeable future. But also, the encumbered amount is something that I need to clean up, perhaps with the help of some staff when we get them, to really use it as a financial management tool. Because we have approved certain expenditures, like our lease, our rent, or the lease of our equipment, and all of that should be encumbered as a budget type of amount, against which expenses will be then signed off by myself and or staff when they come up. But this report is not there yet. We will work towards reflecting the encumbrances that we have approved, and then come back to a future meeting, hopefully shortly, to reflect the encumbrances that we need to approve to continue making those payments. The Comptroller's Office is helping us process payments, but is not helping us do financial management, which is something that we need to, ramp up to do.
Right, okay.
So those are key features of the report. There are a couple of other costs that we may have incurred, and we talked about in our first meeting, that are not being reflected here, I suspect, because we owe back to DCAM as a chargeback. But I will be speaking to that detail, in a subsequent meeting.
Okay, good. And this is one of these issues where finding the line between commission responsibility and
Right.
staff responsibility
Right.
is going to be a work in progress.
Right.
But I know you'll be starting to talk with Stan
Yes.
about, where's that line draw? What do you want to do? What should you be doing? What are the trade-offs between, what else could you be doing?
Right.
So
Right.
basically, however you want to go on that, as far as I'm concerned. But it's an issue for all of us, is trying to figure out where staff work starts and commissioner work leaves off, and vice versa. And it's something I think we kind of need to continue to be attentive to, because we've all been doing staff work, and our jobs are going to change a little bit as staff does begin to come on. Thanks. Anything else about budget and finance? Procurement update? Don't know that there is.
Yes, I have a
Okay.
couple of updates.
Okay, good.
We are contemplating, or we're actually going to be putting out to bid 2 pieces, the video conferencing piece and the stenographer piece, because we anticipate and wish to look at it as the next fiscal year. And if we add the services of what we have been paying, and it has varied because of the
Right.
considerations in terms of venue, or whether we're streaming live or we're not. Because some of these costs in the aggregate, which is a way to look at it, for a year could be more than $50,000. We're not sure, but they could. We're going to issue an RFR, a request for responses, which I will be preparing along with Janice, and we'll post in Compass and in our website, etc. The nuance here will be to articulate the different options that we know are out there, and leave enough room, if you will, to entertain additional options that we may not know about, to see if vendors can come with creative ideas as to how we can be most cost-effective. These will be two procurements that I think is relevant to.
Right. That'll give us some practice at doing creative, open-ended, innovative solicitations.
Right.
Great.
We'll be preparing those documents, and we'll come with an update hopefully next meeting.
Okay. For, you said, for...
Video conferencing.
Video conferencing
And
transcription.
stenographer.
Right.
They, as we understand them now, they are usually done by different firms or groups, but we'll put them at the same time, and we may or may not get somebody who could do both, or who could do separately, and we'll see.
Okay, great. And you'll obviously be in touch with Commissioner McHugh on that, because since he's the one who has to make use of the minutes and stuff.
Right.
Okay, great. Anything else? All right, item 6, public education and information. I put the May 3rd forum sort of wrap up lessons learned. I actually accidentally put it on 2 different places, but I don't know if there's any more that if anything came out of that. I think we all felt pretty good about how it worked out. There were probably variously 150 people there. We had 107 different people watching it streaming, which is not very many people. But I don't know if anybody else have any comments or just feedback or suggestions or debrief that you want to share?
Well, I thought it was an enormously helpful day in terms of a broad sketch of the landscape that we're in, and helping both us, speak for myself, I guess, helping me understand the dimensions of that landscape, and also exposing others, I think, to the complexities of what we're about to deal with, and the amount of precision with which we have to work. I think that's one of my takeaways from that. The complexities and the precision with which we have to address those complexities, and therefore the deliberateness, the speed, I think, with which we ought to be approaching some of these tasks, because they are complicated, they are new, they're new for us, they're new for everybody we're going to be dealing with, and I think that we need to make certain that we understand fully what we're doing, and that the people who are watching us understand fully what we're doing. So that counsels deliberate speed, speed to be sure, but speed consistent with careful deliberation.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and we're just going to have to continue doing this balancing act. Everybody's anxious to get moving, but if you listen to those folks talk, or going to the websites of any of the other big jurisdictions, I mean, this is a massive task. So I agree with that, and just trying to find the balance between moving as quickly as we can and doing it appropriately is an important one, and we got to keep working on it. I was struck by, and this is something Guy and Stan, I hope the consultants can really put us in front, the nature of the technology that's now accessible from every aspect, including the licensing and regulatory process, but also the financial accounting and so forth. I'm sure it changes, by the time we get up and running, there'll be a new generation of technology. So figuring out how we can really be incredibly technology smart is a huge question, and I don't think any of us really have any competence in that to speak of. So we're really going to look to you guys to help us find the expertise to really be out front on that. The other thing is this idea of standardizing across jurisdictions some amount of stuff. Fahrenkopf talked about the easy case, which was whatever it was, I forget.
Fingerprinting.
Fingerprinting, right. I mean, there may be offsetting considerations, but I think the idea of, while we're doing our own work, also thinking to ourselves, is there a way that we can begin to either interface with existing standards or create new standards and be the centerpiece, or work with some of the other industry associations to create efficiencies and synergies and cross-jurisdictional issues. Maybe it's something we want to think about in terms of New England, you know, we think about a New England compact maybe that would have some relationship relative to problem gamblers and so forth. So I think there's a lot of really interesting areas in technology and in interjurisdictional collaboration that, Guy, we're going to need your help to lead us on both of those. And Stan, you know, keeping an eye on that stuff. But I think it was really exciting. I mean, it's really interesting, and we will be the very, for a little while, we'll be the very, very front edge of the industry, and we want to really do it well.
Yes, I was also struck by how much there is to do, but comforted by the fact that there's so many resources out there already. And having said that, I think it's really incumbent upon us, myself individually, but this commission as well, to understand why there are certain standards out there, or what's a better standard in a startup mode versus a steady state mode. When we talk about how commissions have evolved over the years, we heard great insights relative to New Jersey, because they have gone through a very interesting period of evolution. And from my perspective, I think it's imperative and incumbent upon us to try to understand all the lessons learned, and that was the whole purpose of this forum, of that evolution, and what regulations, just to name one example, what are the most incumbent pieces for us to really adopt, analyze, first of all understand, and then adopt, and after that thorough analysis. But I think that the outcome was great.
Yeah.
I just to add, in picking up on Commissioner Zuniga's comment, I mean, the information was great, the experiences that pool of people had in terms of their years of experience and some of the pitfalls, as well as some of the successes that they had. But what was interesting for me was a comment that was made relative to a new commission and staff being very responsive to the wishes of a new commission, but over time, how that relationship changes. Whereas the staff begin to guide the ship and the commission is somewhat beholden to them. You know, we certainly don't want to fall into a predicament of somebody telling us, well, that's the way we've always done it, and we don't want to go down that road.
We've been doing that for the last month.
Right. But, you know, some of the other issues, you know, adjudicatory process, separate and distinct from some of the other processes within the commission, I thought was excellent.
Yeah.
And if I just might add, I know it was very informational to our law enforcement partners, because they now have resources and others to reach out to and receive some training. And I think that was a great help to understanding what they'll need to do moving forward.
And it's so, your point is so, the interagency cooperation on the law enforcement side is so important. It's an issue in the legislation, and I think we voted with our feet, saying to folks, we are going to be partnering with you here. We're not going to Bigfoot this thing, which was great. And you're a critical piece of that, obviously. Anything else? I guess not. Anything else about May 3rd? Commissioner Stebbins, do you want to do a status report on June 14th?
Sure. June 14th is our next public education forum. Again, it's going to be held at Quinsigamond Community College. I'm visiting there tomorrow to lay out space and the resources of the college as they assist us in hosting this event. We've confirmed a number of speakers, and right now really have two strongly identified panels, one being tools that this commission can use from a lot of the studies and reports that were already done, some additional resources that probably haven't been tapped, or at least this commission hasn't tapped, in terms of information, tools, methodologies that we need to consider using when we look at future gaming applicants. And in some discussion I've had around a third session, bringing in some people both from the academic side but also a practical side of looking at best practices for connecting gaming with economic development purposes within particular communities. Finding that best practice help has been interesting. Commissioner Zuniga and I talked to some of the representatives that were here last week from New Jersey. But every state does it differently. Massachusetts is doing it differently, so trying to find similar models or similar kind of case examples is a challenge. But hopefully between some academic help we've reached out to, we'll find one or two kind of best practices that can come in and share that, not only with us, but what I hope will be a good gathering of the general public.
We got some comment last time that we were too heavy on the casino promoters, sort of the casino advocates.
Right.
What do you do? How do you balance the perspectives here on the figuring out the economic impacts?
Sure. We're reaching out to a few people who, going to be in touch with former Attorney General Scott Harshbarger, saying, listen, this isn't a platform for having a gaming or anti-gaming debate. It's more of a platform of, you give us an idea of some things that, our methodologies, our resources, our information that you think we ought to have, kind of notwithstanding all the other information that will be presented or has already been presented. So we're trying to create a balanced approach in terms of tell us what we need to do our job correctly and do it well. So.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to know, and I think that's going to be great. And we will, this is all posted on the website. We're looking, and there are people in the room who have already sent us stuff. We're looking for additional research data. We're looking for critiques of research data. We're looking for an analysis to help anybody who's got constructive ideas about, as I put the question, what do we need to know and when do we need to know it?
Right.
And then secondly, do we have the resources at our fingertips to learn it? But there are, we want assumptions to be challenged in a constructive way, and we will be reaching out as aggressively as we can to solicit that kind of feedback, as well as from the folks who have been lined up doing this kind of work for a long time.
Right.
Anything else on that forum? That's probably going to be about a half a day. It won't be a full day, right?
Right now, if we keep it to 2 panels, it'll be a half a day. If we end up finding a number of people to speak on that kind of third topic session, it may stretch over into the early afternoon.
Just on the third topic session, this is something that I talked about actually more before there were other commissioners, and I don't know whether it's just whistling Dixie or not, but I think what Commissioner Stebbins and I have talked about is, are there people out there who can help us think creatively about the economic impact side? We've talked a lot about tourism. We know that there's a tension that sometimes casinos are perceived as all self-contained, that suck resources out of the rest of the community, doesn't really enhance the tourism business. But we also talked about places where it does enhance the tourism business, and we've talked as a group strategically, how can we maximize that enhancement as opposed to the negative consequences? But that's only the tourism industry. Are there other ways, from land use and intellectual property or educational system? We talked about the community college system and so forth. So are there other ways that we can use this resource strategically to have a positive economic impact? And the answer may be no, but I think it's a question we want to ask as thoughtfully as we can. And there are great people just around this town, never mind in the Commonwealth, who are city planners, who are economic development experts, who are great economists. And so we want to be thinking as aggressively as we can and as creatively as we can about finding those kinds of people to stimulate us in our thinking. So if anybody's got ideas, we would love to have them. Okay,
Have we approached the community colleges? I know we've approached them from the standpoint of looking at that compact that they've created. But I wonder if they wouldn't be a source of some of the kinds of ideas you're talking about. Every one of these casinos is going to have a huge machinery plant that's going to require computerized operation. Is there some way that one can use those control rooms and control spaces and those kinds of things as a laboratory or provide internships for people who are trying to learn that kind of industry? Are there in some industries in this large enterprise that's going to be placed there, industries that are transferable to other segments of the economy, and that community colleges, technical high schools could take advantage of for internships and other learning opportunities, and could we get some creative energy out of the people who run those schools so that we think about incorporating that into some of the things that criteria we're looking for when it comes to license awarding time. That's just one example, but I think the idea of looking to leverage these institutions, these facilities, would be a terrific idea.
I think that's I happen to have the chance to serve on the board of STCC a while ago, and obviously the Springfield Technical Community College, and obviously the mission of the community college is to focus on those immediate job development needs in the area. The legislation clearly spells out some of the design guidelines for any of these, for these casinos in terms of LEED certification and a number of other things. But, as we talked about with the business group from Western Mass the other day, when an applicant files their application and is supposed to identify their impact on small business and tourism, we should think of that less with a negative connotation, more in the positive. And putting the kind of request out there to the business community to get them energized to think of how we can approach these gaming interests who, are popping up around Massachusetts to say we want to be a proactive partner with you to support our local small business and tourism as well as, the educational piece.
Where I thought you were going was also the high-tech industry. I mean, this is becoming a very high-tech industry. It's a vastly growing worldwide industry. There are probably startup creative people who have, this internet gaming is going to happen. We know we've got all kinds of internet expertise. So, maybe that's another thing that we could convene a group of people to talk about. But it doesn't come easy. But it's something I really want to push the envelope that we really think hard about.
I know there's an item in the agenda relative to research agenda, but I just want to mention these as we embark on the baseline study that we need to provide to the legislature a year from now, or a year from November. So we had a good meeting with people from UMass Amherst who brought up the point that the study will be conducted, however, but then data will have to be compiled to benchmark or assess against that benchmark. As we develop systems to capture that data about incidents of gambling, there are potential for us to leverage that software, system, data, etc., whereas we're also collecting information relative to economic impact, the positive aspects, not just the tourism industry, but wherever else, and the negative aspects, if there are such. So I think there's great opportunities to try to bring those aspects together as we embark on these research projects.
Great. Okay, on the next one is other forums. We talked last time, it's my job to put together a forum that will have two dimensions. One is community mitigation issues, and the other is problem gambling. Commissioner Stebbins and I met with MAPC, 3 people from MAPC, and they're very interested in participating. They've done some good work about the issues of community mitigation, what are the issues, and we asked them if they would be willing to be the coordinator of this panel, or this segment of the discussion, and help us pick other panelists, very much like you did. You found a moderator and worked with them. And I think I don't think they formally said yes yet, but they're going to do it, I'm sure. And we've talked with some other people, the Central Mass RPA, the Western Mass, I think it's called RPA. They talked about the Southeastern Mass RPA. So the issue for us, as we talked with them, is whether there are 2 community mitigation topics. One is just to help the commissioners be thinking about issues that we want to address in the process, you know, particularly in our RFP and in our review process. And that is, as Commissioner Stebbins said, that's not just avoiding the negatives, it's trying to figure out the positives too. You know, are there ways that we can encourage and proactively support small businesses rather than not? So, but the other is the one we've talked about before, which is what is our role relative to proactively supporting potential host and surrounding communities? And I think we kind of felt that they're 2 different issues. But we said to MAPC, you guys think about it. And we have reached out to MMA, Mass Municipal Association, and the Collins Center at the McCormick School. Commissioner Stebbins, I think, has talked to them. There may be some interest there in taking the lead. We've kind of decided that we're not sure we want ourselves to be the lead on this for fear of getting too involved with different communities, with maybe parceling out different information, but we want to make sure somebody is doing this. So we did talk about that with MAPC, and we invited them to tell us whether they thought it was 2 different things or not. So we'll see where that goes. On the problem gambling issue, I haven't yet talked to her, but I'm now blanked on her last name, Kathleen Scanlon, right, who is seems to be the lead person on problem gambling, and was the head of the main Problem Gambling Association in Massachusetts for a long time, did a lot of work on the legislation. We're going to talk with her about whether she will lead that panel, be the moderator of that panel. We've got some other ideas of people to be on it. I'm very much interested in this question that I asked at the other session, which is how much of the revenues of the operators, slots and casinos, comes from problem gambling. And the panelists didn't have any answers to that. But some people came up to me and said that they did have research projects, and I've got a bunch of research projects that are worth looking at. But I think it's something that we need to understand what the terminology means. You know, Fahrenkopf was talking about 1% pathological gambling, but there's probably a continuum of pathological to problem, just like alcoholism and everything else.
Right.
So kind of define your terms. But I think it's a data point. I don't know what we do with it, but I think we want to know it. And it will say a lot about how we address problem gambling. So in this issue of problem gambling, that's one of the topics I'm going to hope to get people to be able to speak to with some kind of authority. Are you moving like you had something to say on that? Okay. And again, you know, this is not for the purpose of debating whether we're going to have casinos or not. This is for the purpose of informing us as well as possible about the issues that we need to address as we license and regulate the industry. We don't have a date yet. I would like to get it done as maybe even the week before Commissioner Stebbins' conference, but I don't know if we can get that done. We'll try to get it done the next month. Okay.
Could I just interject now, not to rehash any of these things, but these forums are enormously valuable and enormously helpful to all of us. They're also enormously time-consuming in the effort and energy it takes to put together. And I wonder if we've thought about, after these next 2 occur, using the mechanism of public hearings in various parts of the state to gather information for two reasons. One, it's helpful to continue to have a presence and a public presence where we talk about general ideas rather than the kinds of stuff we're talking about here.
Right.
And secondly, in those kinds of presentations and environments, I think we are likely to pick up local, on-the-ground information and concerns that we wouldn't otherwise think about, and use them then as a basis for planning and thinking about either further forums or at least further discussion about the contents of our application processing. So while I think that these forums are terrific, and if they're all the caliber of last week's, they'll be enormously valuable. But I wonder if after that we couldn't consider going to a different mode of information gathering for a while.
Well, I think the answer to that is yes, and it was in the interview process of the communications people that they have experience doing that kind of organized outreach. It'll come under that. It'll come under
Right.
Elaine,
Right.
and that's one frustration about her not starting till the 29th. Is I was looking to her to sort of give us a plan for
Right.
something like that. But I
Right.
think that's crucial, and that we probably are not going to be able to wait until she gets here to start thinking about it. But I think that's really important. And again, from if public has ideas about how we might constructively do that, we're interested in hearing them. Anything else on any of that?
Well, to append to that, we could also entertain the notion of having groups or a group of people to come discuss to any one of these public meetings a particular topic, if we so chose. Just putting
To this meeting?
To this
Yeah,
this
right,
meeting.
I agree.
I think some of the meetings that we've had, on a one-on-one basis, with like the one you mentioned with MAPC, or one I mentioned earlier with
Right.
UMass Amherst, are of tremendous value that all five of us collectively could benefit, rather than two of us and then later we give an update or we make a note, et cetera. So I think it's just something to consider.
No, I think that's a good point. And any of us who are having these one-on-one where we're representing the commission, any of them you feel is particularly valuable that we ought to add to the whole group, it's the only way we can have a group conversation is to have them come to that. And so I think that'd be a great idea. And I think there'll be others, as we get into this, there'll be a lot of things that we'll be wanting to have people come here, just like we are today, talking about this RFQ process.
Right.
So I think that's a great point. Did Commissioner McHugh, was 6D your?
Yes, I
item?
put that on there, Mr. Chairman. We've been getting a number, not a huge volume of requests, typically via our website, but not exclusively, from various representatives of cities and towns, various citizens who are interested in a number of issues that arise out of the gaming statute. I've been handling most of those, and most of those can be resolved, at least the ones that come in through the web and without being directed to a specific person. Most of them can be handled without much difficulty. They're fairly straightforward questions that have fairly straightforward answers, but some can't. And we don't have at the moment a mechanism for either cataloging, responding to, or figuring out what the response should be to some of those questions. And so I would like to recommend that we put into place some kind of a procedure for doing that, so that we get to them regularly and without structuring it into fine detail, that procedure consists of making sure they all go to Brandon to put into a data bank that he's maintaining, that they then come to one of us, and I'm happy to continue to do it if that's appropriate, that the ones that I can answer without difficulty, I just go ahead and answer. And then every week, we have a little space reserved for the ones that come in that week that I can't answer, I'll try to distribute them the preceding Friday, so we have a chance to think about them. Or if they come in by email, just send the email around. If they don't, send around a little précis of what the question is. We talk about them briefly here on these meetings, which is really the only time we have a chance to get together, and then we get an answer out the next day, so that we can answer them in a timely fashion, but answer them with some confidence that the answer represents the consensus of the commission in those gray areas, of which there are many, that we need to deal with. So it struck me that that would be an approach.
I'm not quite sure, I don't remember seeing any that really required that kind of conversation, but you're seeing most of them, so it sounds like you're.
There aren't many, but the ones that there
Yeah,
are
okay,
there, and
right,
we don't have a
okay.
mechanism, I
Right.
don't think.
Okay.
I've had a couple come in, and again, we've talked about this in terms of essentially posting what I would consider as some type of opinion or policy position of this commission relative to some of the questions we're getting from municipalities. We had one from Springfield, we had another one come in from Palmer, and it's not just, a general comment about, impact on the lottery or anything like that. It's questions about negotiating host community agreement. It's a question of, well, we have different kind of water authorities within a community, and how does, how do we direct the negotiations with respect to that? So I'm more than happy to work with Commissioner McHugh to kind of vet through some of these, but at the same time, I think it's helpful for us, after we bring those to this body, to put those up on the web is kind of, I think other state agencies do it with respect to opinions, just say, here's the question, here's our opinion on it, and again, kind of share that information back through our friends at MMA at the same time.
And it may be that we get questions, and I suspect we will, that we can't answer, and we just say we can't answer that, but it illustrates an area where we need to do some more work and thinking, particularly at the early stages when there's a lot that we don't have answers to. But that mechanism is one to help us think about these things.
Is that now in place? Is Brandon now cataloging?
He is cataloging everything that comes in over the web, but what we'd add to that are things that come in by phone or by letter or by carrier pigeon. However they get there, we could make sure that Brandon gets them.
Okay, so is that a database that's in shape that you can add to that?
Yes.
You keep some sort of a logging and check-in?
Yeah, just a list on some sheet right now.
Okay. Well, I think there's a lot of data management stuff. I feel sort of the same way about resumes, we keep, resumes just pour in over the transom, and we're trying to keep ahead of them and make sure that we keep track of them so that when jobs do come up that fit the resumes, we remember to think about them and so forth. But I think that's one of the things that we're hoping Janice and Brandon, we're gonna hire a receptionist so Brandon can get off the front desk and do some more of this kind of stuff. But we probably ought to, as you got the bandwidth, we probably ought to just at least have a nice little list of the data management systems that we are working on. So that's good. I'll add to the agenda next week. We'll add that item.
Okay.
And I will just echo the notion of documenting those procedures, because many of, and they don't have to be fancy, essentially what Commissioner McHugh just outlined, if we could just write it down in a couple of paragraphs, I'll volunteer to do most of that while we get a lot of the clerical staff, so that then we can refer to it and update it if necessary, the procedure. Or if nothing else, point it to when we will be required to produce some of these procedures as part of the comptroller's review of procedures, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea.
So documenting procedures is also
Good
important.
idea. Something somebody said reminded me of something I forgot to say about MAPC. They asked Commissioner Stebbins and I whether we would like to have this topic include advice about dealing with surrounding communities. And the legislation gives us enormous discretion on defining surrounding communities and on how the applicants need to deal with surrounding communities. And we encourage them, yes, by all means, put that on that would definitely be on the agenda to help us think about that. I just thought that was an interesting observation on their board. Okay, anything else on item 6? So let's move off to the racing commissioner. The racing commissioner. That would be Commissioner Cameron.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. As we've reported in prior meetings, we have been working on a comprehensive transition plan. We've been working with staff from DPL as well as the Comptroller's Office on various transition issues. With regard to operations, we are looking at this point to preserve the operational status quo for this racing season. No changes to the track operations for this racing season. We will have full details to report at next week's meeting on how we plan to have that work. Two of the other issues, we are working on ISAs, the inter-service agency agreements, to address, the continuity of the Racing Stabilization Fund. That one is just about complete. We have payments that will go out within the next 2 weeks. And there's a second ISA specifically dealing with DPL and State Racing Commission staff and contract employees. Again, we are close to ironing out last details, and we'll have a full report next week, and we will be asking for the approval of the commission at that time to move forward with those plans. These will all be before the May 20th deadline, next week's meeting. A third issue is emergency regulations. This is something that has been recommended by our law firm, and we are looking at the best way to promulgate those emergency regulations. And in actuality, what we would be doing is officially adopting the State Racing Commission regulations to be effective May 20th to the Gaming Commission.
Okay, so our emergency regulations would be basically taking over their regulations?
Yes.
More or less.
We will have a final decision on if that's
Okay.
the course of action by next week. And again, we would be requesting approval at that time to go ahead and move forward with that regulation. And the fourth issue is, as we've reported before, we did put out a request, an RFR, for a consulting service to help us better understand our new responsibilities, what are the best practices in the racing industry. And we did receive one comprehensive, there aren't that many racing experts, as we're finding out, but we did receive one comprehensive proposal from the Last Frontier consulting firm, which is really Annie Allman, who is the principal with that company. She has a extensive background in racing, and what she has done has teamed with Spectrum Gaming, using Spectrum as a subcontractor, and they will be helping her with some of the statistical data reporting for this comprehensive review. Just to get into a little bit about what we've asked and what they've proposed, we're talking about a holistic overview of the Massachusetts racing industry from a multi-stakeholder perspective, and that's what we asked for in the RFR. We're looking at key insights, potential hotspots regarding our transition from the State Racing Commission. Annie Allman would serve as the project manager in this, and she would be conducting in-person field and industry expert interviews, interface with us on this project. And again, Spectrum would be subbing for her with some statistical analysis and text review for her. The things we've asked for in brief, functions, the workflow, the budget, financial oversight, the employee climate, legal issues, the racing industry in Massachusetts as it compares to others around the country, the perspective from racing associates, the horseman's trainer, owner perspective, and the public perception of racing. In a transition like this, in a situation where we are mandated to oversee this part of gaming, and this is racing, we just thought this would be very, very informative to us to understand where we are, if changes have to be made. I'd like to emphasize that we would not be looking to make any changes this year during this racing season, we wouldn't be looking to make any changes. This would be moving forward next year if changes are necessary. But to understand that, we thought that this would be a good step, and I would, at this time, like to make a motion that we hire Last Frontier and the Spectrum Gaming to conduct this overview of the mass racing industry for us moving forward.
Is there a second?
Second.
How do we, what will the, do you know for sure yet what the full commission will be needing to do here from time to time? What are we going to have to do?
We will have a full report next week on those responsibilities. Frankly, most of those responsibilities from a commission standpoint will be falling to me. And we've had several meetings to talk about exactly what will be needed.
Okay.
And we'll, it's premature to advise
Okay.
this week. Next week, we will have had all of our stakeholders kind of give their final opinions on how to move forward, and we'll have a comprehensive plan to lay out to the full commission.
Okay, great. Is it in the notion somewhere, or maybe if it isn't, could it be that we're going to need some kind of a sort of an orientation so to understand, what this is? I'm not even sure how many, how we know how many facilities there are and what goes on there and so forth. Maybe we ought to take a field trip or two, or maybe we ought to, I don't exactly know how, but some kind of a sort of an overview of the racing world that we're now a part of.
Well,
Presumably
I
a part
think
of.
this may be an opportunity, as Commissioner McHugh spoke about, and that Commissioner Zuniga talked about, is maybe having someone come in
Yeah.
and give that overview. I've been getting many briefings and probably have a better understanding because of my responsibilities with this, but this may be an opportunity where we bring
Yeah.
some of the experts in to tell us exactly what the day-to-day operations are like, so we'll have a better understanding.
Well, I would, I think that'd be a great idea, but I also think that we ought to go look at the facilities. There aren't many of them. I think it'd be very helpful to see them. I think it'd be very helpful to see some of the people. There aren't many of them either, comparatively speaking, and we are going to be responsible for regulating this, and I, for one, would like to have a better close-up view of that environment than I have now. I also wonder whether or not we are thinking about offloading some of the functions that as this plan is formulated over the coming week. Whether, for example, we can get the Division of Administrative Law Appeals to do the kind of appellate and fact-finding work that the Commission has been doing. I think if we could do that, they're very professional folks. I don't know what the requirements are we have to ask them if they'll do that for us, but that would take a large chunk of day-to-day kinds of things out of our jurisdiction, and they are very well equipped to do that. So I would hope that would be something that we'd consider in formulating the plan, at least the possibility and feasibility of it.
Is that something you've heard about before?
No, we had not considered that. I'll be honest with you, Commissioner McHugh. As I look at this, the responsibilities are not that great.
Mm-hmm.
And really analyzing what the State Racing Commission does. They meet once a month.
Mm-hmm.
They hear anywhere between 1 and 4 appeals on a monthly basis. So I have been analyzing the workflow, and at this time, I think it's something that we could handle. But certainly that's something we could consider is
Okay.
is an alternative. Thank you for suggesting.
Throw that out as a suggestion. I also wonder if, what is the deadline for the emergency regulations? Do we know when they have to be?
Well, yes,
when
we
they
would have to have
filed?
it in place at the time of the May 20th transition.
I know, but is there a number of days before they go into effect, that we have to file them with the Secretary of State?
Well,
Or they just
we're-
go?
what we're looking to do, if this is the course of action, we would file immediately after next week's meeting. And according to our lawyers advising us, they'd have the appropriate time
Okay.
to take the next necessary steps, so we would be ready to go on May 20th.
Okay.
Commissioner McHugh may be alluding to, if we were to file permanent regulations.
No,
then
I
we need
understand
a-
permanent
we need a
regulations are
but-
different, and
No.
I'm just want to make sure that
Yeah.
and I'm sure that this is all i's are dotted and t's are crossed, but I wanted to make sure that we would have the emergency regulations in place by the time they have to be in
Right.
place. Yeah, all right.
And part of that conversation, it's how much you end up doing too, since and can the kind of staff person, either existing or new, replace as much of that as possible, because, we've got an awful lot of things in the law enforcement business for us to get going on, so.
We've had some really substantive meetings with regard to every piece of this transition.
Okay, great.
And it's just premature because final decisions will be made this
Okay,
week.
right.
And I think we'll be able to lay those things out in detail by next week's
Glad
meeting.
Glad you know about this. I think the idea of field trips is right on, and, we could pick a couple of days in June and go,
Absolutely.
I think it's only 3 facilities, right?
Yes,
Um,
with one that, 3 facilities, one of which just has simulcasting.
Right. So we could, in a day or two, we could go, and it'd
Yes.
probably be worth,
Mhm.
getting a tour, meeting the people, meeting the employees, being told how stuff works. I think that's a great idea.
It was my plan to
Your plan.
certainly go out with the consultant and make introductions, but certainly others are willing to, or rather, welcome to join us.
Right. Well, I think getting you out there with the consultant and introducing her,
Mhm.
that's a good idea too. But at some point, we ought to have some hands-on
Yeah.
familiarity with what we're doing.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Agreed.
good. Yeah,
Good
no, I think
idea.
it's a good idea. Okay, where was I? Anything else on Racing Commission? As far as, yeah.
You made a motion.
You made a
Oh,
motion
sorry.
to.
Yes, sorry.
to-
Any other discussion about the motion to adopt the proposal from Last Frontier and Spectrum? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Great, thank you, that'll be terrific. Thank you a lot for doing this. Okay. I think, interagency relations, internet gaming. Commissioner Zuniga, do you have I know you all had a meeting yesterday.
No, that was on charitable.
Oh, okay,
gaming.
sorry.
Very quick update there's a task force meeting of the Treasurer's Office on, they call that online products, which is fine, on May 14th.
Online.
So that's next week.
Right. So it's online products.
Online
task force.
products.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the precise term. It's fine that we have this term here, because this is really what is of our interest, internet
Right.
gaming. But the terminology is broader, if you will, because there could be lottery online
Right.
products.
Right.
So no, we'll just be attending that meeting.
And I think I mentioned last week
Yes.
that I'm going to go to that first meeting.
Yep.
Commissioner Zuniga is going to be our regular representative, but I'm going to go to that first meeting to just help really emphasize the point that we think it's important to look at this thing holistically at the get-go, so we don't end up in a turf battle over who gets what. We need to look at the good that can be done by gaming, as well as the bad, by expanded online gaming, and figure out what's the most propitious place to put that and to regulate it. I think it's important for us to be right four square that that's how we're going to try to approach this. Anything else on that?
There's no update otherwise.
Tribal, I don't think we have anything new to report. We haven't got any kind of a status report or anything recently. Okay. All right, strategic considerations number 9.
Did we report the last time that the First Circuit is going to hear the urban case in June 13th, I think. That's the case that's brought by the developer in Fall River, claiming that the tribal preference in the statute is unconstitutional.
Right.
And there was some concern, not concern, some uncertainty as to what the date that the First Circuit would, the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, the Federal Appellate Court, when they would hear the appeal from the district court decision dismissing the case. And I think the date is June 13th or June 14th. It's in that area someplace. So it's going to be heard as early as one could have hoped, because the resolution, one way or another, is going to end some uncertainty that attends that whole area of the statute.
Yeah, good. I think on the 17th, I'm going to speak at a big sort of regional, Southeastern Mass Regional Chamber of Commerce. So I'm going to probably want to get some serious briefing on that situation. Okay, anything else on those? Item 9, A, we can skip. That was in there by accident. B, finally, we're to Guy Michael. Thank you very much. Sorry? Oh, good, thanks. Just to introduce, during our review of our gaming consultant applications, we spent a few minutes at not communicating because the Michael and Carol team was talking about what we thought was the RFP process that would be starting very, very soon. And we're thinking, how can we start that? Finally figured out that what they're talking about is this bifurcated process. And I thought this is a big enough deal for us that we ought to spend our time really understanding what this is before we decide whether we want to go forward with this. So we asked Guy to come in and just kind of walk us through the process, the theory, the issues, and then we can fire away for questions.
Sure.
Thank you very
Mr. Chairman,
much.
thank you very much. Members of the Commission, thank you for inviting me up here to brief you on this subject. Before I get into that, if you don't mind, on the India tribal gaming, just one mention. Stan and we met with representatives of the Governor's Office and the Attorney General's Office last Friday.
Great.
And had discussions about tribal gaming issues, and to the extent that we can be helpful there, we are trying to do that.
Yeah, well, that's great, because I made a note of that, too, at that meeting, to make sure that we get our consultants in that loop, because, and now we've got Stan, who is very familiar with that, but that's great, and I appreciate that, because it's, whatever gets done, we are going to end up owning some portion of it, and we want to have a major say in how it gets done, so great, that's good, thank you.
Good. Well, back to the RFP and RFQ. What we think in our discussions, as the chairman has mentioned, seems to be the process, first of all, that is contemplated by the legislation, and that, of course, is the pole star of everything, to look and see what the legislature intended. And there is a section in the legislation, Section 12C, that specifically provides that if the Bureau, that's the investigative bureau of your commission, has determined that an applicant is suitable to receive a gaming license, the Bureau shall recommend that the commission commence a review of the entire application. So we read that to mean that there would be an initial review, one step out of the two-step process, that would be conducted by the Bureau of the background suitability of those persons who have an interest in ultimately obtaining a license to operate a casino in the Commonwealth. That would constitute what we would call the RFQ. And the RFQ would deal exclusively with those integrity background issues of the applicant. It would not have any, it would not include any aspects of the applicant's developmental ideas, their impacts on the community, what the casino is going to look like, how many people it will employ. That would be for a later date. The purpose of this RFQ would be to initially evaluate the backgrounds of the people who are applying, so that this commission can screen out, basically, those who would not meet that standard. The advantages of this are many. First of all, you would, of course, avoid the unfortunate circumstance of going through the entire process, which would include both the background investigation and the evaluation of the project, and the local approvals and the local election, and then ultimately finding out that the person who had obtained all those approvals from the local community had gone to the trouble of putting together this big project, had won an election in the local community, ultimately isn't qualified because of some problem in their background, and you have to start the process all over again. By doing it this way, you would avoid those what could be monstrously difficult obstacle to moving forward efficiently. It also, from the applicant's point of view, it avoids their having to spend all the money and effort and time on obtaining all those approvals and putting together their plans and so on before they know whether or not they could even proceed. So they would be able to get that initial green light or red light, depending on the circumstances, before they have to go any further. And without requiring that complete project description, again, it mitigates a lot of the cost that the applicants would have to go through. And not only the cost to the applicants, but the cost to the agency of having to analyze all these plans and evaluate them when they weren't necessary. And the cost to all the local communities of evaluating these projects when, in fact, those projects may never be able to come to fruition. So the two-step process has all of those advantages, and fundamentally, we think it's what the legislature intended. So once the two-step process would be implemented, what we would be thinking that the commission would do would be to issue this RFQ, and what it would include would be essentially an application form of a very extensive nature. These application forms are not like applying for a magazine subscription. This is very comprehensive, very detailed.
I've distributed the.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. There are, as the chairman and as the commission has before them then, standard type forms that are used in many jurisdictions. And to the chairman's point earlier about interjurisdictional cooperation, the International Association of Gaming Regulators, in conjunction with the International Association of Gaming Advisors, has devised a multi-state jurisdictional form that is used in many jurisdictions as the standard form for these types of applications.
That's the personal disclosure.
That's the personal disclosure form. And that form would be filed by those persons that the commission determines are what are typically in the industry called qualifiers, those individuals whose relationship to the project is such that their individual qualifications are a necessary precondition to the qualification of the project itself. These typically include the members of the board of directors of the company, the officers of the company, the key employees of the company, and shareholders. The extent of the shareholding would depend on whether it's a public or a private company. If it's a public company, there are thresholds that can be established in terms of which are the controlling shareholders who would need to file one of these forms. The types of organizations that have thus far publicly at least announced their interest in Massachusetts are acquainted with and accustomed to these types of inquiries in this type of format, and it would come as no surprise to them, and they've probably filed them in other jurisdictions. In addition to the individuals, there would be a corporate form that would need to be filed by both the entity that would hold the license, which is typically a subsidiary of holding companies that otherwise own the project. So you would have corporate business entity forms filed by the licensed entity and then up the chain to ultimately the controlling entity. Whether there are intermediary companies in between or not, it would ultimately go to the holding company and the individual qualifiers within that holding company so that you have an overall picture of everyone who would have a material impact on the operation of the casino. Those forms would then be referred to the Bureau. They would not be the exclusive source of information about the applicant. They are basically a starting point for the investigation into the applicant. The investigators would have the opportunity to first review all the information there, but then with regard to anything that they thought needed further inquiry, they could either request additional information from the applicants themselves. Typically, there are visitations to the applicants, individual interviews with the applicants, background checks with other jurisdictions with regard to the applicants, and a very extensive investigation into who you're dealing with. At the culmination of that process, there would be a recommendation made to you as to whether or not those applicants are deemed suitable. If they are, they pass that part of the test, and then they could proceed to the RFP process, which we would get into at a later date. If they are not found suitable by you, there would be an opportunity for them to contest that finding, and ultimately, it's a contest, again, before you, and they would be able to, if they could convince you otherwise, they might be able to proceed. If they could not convince you otherwise, their adventure in Massachusetts would be over. The information that you have before you in terms of the extensiveness of the application, these investigations are unpredictable in their length. It depends on how complicated the corporate structure is, how many entities are necessary to investigate the background of, how many people are involved in it, how familiar the investigators are with the people who are involved. And as I say, this industry has some players that have been in everywhere, and that investigators are somewhat familiar with already, but that does not mean that they pass your test. You would be independently given the opportunity to review them. And also any additional issues that arise in the course of the investigation, and more relevant, the cooperation of the applicants in how their alacrity in providing the information to you upon your requests. They, under the law, are obligated to comply with your requests, and their failure to do so would be a cause for their being deemed unsuitable in and of itself. There are some issues in the language of the legislation with respect to the way that the applications themselves are handled typically, and we would think it would be the same here, that the background information is private and is confidential. It would become public only if it became an issue that needed to be litigated in a public forum.
Is there unclarity, are you saying?
No, that is essentially what we believe the legislation holds. There are we received some questions at the seminar about that, so apparently some people are reading the statute and aren't certain of that. We think that's the way the law should be interpreted.
And as you read it, it's something that the applicants would be comfortable with.
Once it's explained that that's what the language says, yes.
Okay.
That's essentially the overview. I mean, I don't know how much more detail you'd want to go into it. I'm obviously available right here for your questions.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience working in many jurisdictions, do you have a ballpark kind of a percentage of those applicants that apply that may not be suitable?
In the early stages of the industry, the percentage was much higher than it is now. When you're dealing with the applications we'd be dealing with in this RFQ process, we're dealing with only the highest level of employee and the entities themselves. We're not talking about the dealers and the lower level employees who would be ultimately staffing the casino. So, as I say, a lot of the applicants who have voiced public interest in Massachusetts are well-known and are licensed in many other jurisdictions. And unless they introduce new players that have not been previously approved, I would think the percentage would be fairly low.
Go ahead, please. I take it that the import of this is not only that we would save a lot of time and money if we did this bifurcated process, potentially, one way or the other. You eliminate some uncertainty early and you either go forward or you go back. You also potentially speed up the initial stages. which suggests to me, I guess, that we need to think about at an early stage building the bureau, because if you're going to receive these applications, particularly these complex applications, we have to have a repository for them, probably electronic, and we also have to have the processors who are the bureau, so that if the legislation permits this bifurcated approach, and if it makes sense, and assuming we can get by the first hurdle, it does certainly make sense to me, then the creation of the bureau and the training that the bureau is going to need ought to be an early consideration for us, right?
I agree. But there's a nuance to that, in that the Bureau need not be staffed up at the outset in a way that would accommodate the initial needs, because the initial needs are going to overwhelm the later needs. You're going to get a flood of applications, not just in this RFP, but when all the staffing of the casino starts, right. You're going to get an enormous flood of applications that would require a large staff at the Bureau. But that's going to trickle down.
I understand that.
Okay, and so the staffing, but on the RFP itself, so there are two ways to do it. Certainly, the Bureau is ultimately responsible, so they will have to have staff that can do this. But it also could be a lot of jurisdictions subcontract these initial investigations out while the Bureau is being staffed, so that the subcontractor can both start the process sooner and train at the same time, so that then the subcontractor is weaned off the process as the commission staffing becomes appropriate to the task.
Well, the subcontracting piece, of course, is a policy decision that
Absolutely.
we have to make. Yeah.
My question was exactly that. I had phrased it as to what sort of infrastructure would we need in terms of bodies, budget, and timeline. But it's essentially the same
Okay.
relative to
Right.
that intake.
Right, and I think that would be the policy decision, as Commissioner McHugh points out, as to whether or not you want to take it all in-house, in which case, yes, there would need to be substantial staffing needs addressed quite quickly, or entirely subcontracted, I guess, which would eliminate that problem, or somewhere in between, which would allow for the Bureau to gradually get up to speed.
And could you also, you mentioned some, large public companies, many with subsidiaries, et cetera. What's a, for this personal disclosure form, what's a ballpark of the number of people, officers, shareholders, or owners? I know it's difficult. It varies tremendously if it's a private company as opposed to a public company.
Right, that can vary widely in the size. This is a gross estimate, but 15 to 20, those per company. And beyond the companies themselves, when we're talking about shareholders, not just equity shareholders, but a lot of the financing obviously is in debt securities. So it would, you'd have to evaluate, and one of the things that the consulting group is working on is developing for you as part of the strategic plan a scope of licensing. That's one of the pegs of the strategic plan, so that we identify for you who needs to apply in connection with each of these entities. What level of debt security should you consider as a threshold for application? What level of equity security, ownership, and so on? So those are decisions we'll ultimately make, but there too, it would depend on whether the debt securities are held by institutional investors or whether they're held by individuals or held overseas. There are a variety of factors that play into it, but just to get back to your initial question, I would say anywhere between 15 and 20 is a good estimate.
Go ahead.
I also, I'm also, in terms of infrastructure, whether it's contracted out or in-house or in between, I'm thinking of the criteria that we will use ultimately to decide what constitutes a pre-qualification or not. And some of it is intuitive by the questions that are asked in here, but other may not. And I know there is a level of what's the word I'm looking
Dis-
for?
discretion.
Discretion.
Okay.
That we need to allow for. That's the whole point of these open ended questions, some of them here. But what can you tell us relative to criteria that we could have in place before we issue these sort of RFQs?
The criteria are intentionally ambiguous in just about every statute and here as well, and that's really the only way it can be done. Essentially, it's good character, honesty, and integrity, and financial stability and financial integrity, casino experience and business ability and experience. And each jurisdiction makes its own determination on what those standards should mean for the policy of that jurisdiction. There are companies that have been licensed in one jurisdiction and not in another. Same issue. The standards should be high. This is, especially at the outset, we've said this at the public sessions last week. At the outset of any gaming enterprise, any gaming regulatory process, you set the bar high. You can't raise it later. And so it would be important that you look to the highest degree of integrity and good character in evaluating any of these applications. But if I wish I could give you a very specific mathematical calculation on what that means, but there simply isn't any.
So does the, to follow up on that, so the law and the system accommodates us asking broad-based questions like what's your debt ratios?
Right.
And we can then decide, after this all comes back in, what level of debt ratios we can tolerate.
Yeah, up to a point. Now, we would recommend, I think, when again, the consultants provide you with a strategic plan, and in that scope of licensing area, we would probably recommend to you some standard, because the applicants need to know that too before they apply. What is it that you are looking for? In the background, in the good character areas, it's harder to say. In the financial stability and financial responsibility areas, there are guidelines that can be done by regulation to show that this is what we need in terms of a debt-to-equity ratio for you to demonstrate your capacity. And the statute also provides, even in the integrity areas, thinking about it, there are some definite standards, there are some automatic disqualifications, felony convictions, and so on for certain offenses that automatically would disqualify someone. But for the most part, in the applications you'll be receiving in this RFQ process, it would be rare that someone would come to you with that kind of a background.
Is there a way, or is it envisioned either in the legislation or the process that you have thought about for the disclosure form or thresholds, rather, the criteria to be different for the different licensees that we will be contemplating, type 1 casinos, type 2 slots parlors? Because they have different levels of minimum investment, so the debt-to-equity ratio could be considerably different.
Well, in that sense, yeah, the application form probably would not be any different.
Okay.
Your evaluation of it might differ depending on the, like you say, on whether it's type 1 or type 2.
Right.
But the application form would not. I also don't want to leave you with the impression that the application forms that we provided to you, the multi-jurisdiction, everything would be precisely what ultimately we would recommend. Every jurisdiction tampers with them, does a little bit of tailoring to whatever the jurisdiction wants. And in fact, many, in addition to the multi-state application, have a state supplement. You could have a Massachusetts supplement that would go with it that could be addressed to specific issues that you're more concerned about.
I have a general question about, I mean, it sounds like, the legislation allows us, or essentially directs us to do this anyways. The question is, what step? I mean, we're going to go all the way through that process. You said of the local approval, the host community agreement, it comes to us and, potentially it gets kicked out. How does that kind of address the timeframes that we've talked about a 6-month RFP process, or 6-month period for an applicant to respond to the RFP, 6-month evaluation by, the commission? Are we cutting those timelines in half, or at least shortening them?
No.
By going through this step, or are we still talking about the same
No, we're still talking about the
time?
same kind of timelines. This doesn't, this doesn't prevent you from following any of the other statutory limitations that are in the Act. You would, in fact, if it works the way it's envisioned, it would allow you to do this in a more expedient way. So you'd be able to get through it in a lot quicker. There aren't any statutory deadlines that I'm aware of that would be at risk as a result of doing this.
Okay. Is it possible, or has it worked, that this process, probably more than the review of the proposal process,
Yeah.
which I consider to be a little potentially more subjective, I'd look at this process as more objective.
Right.
And it's more of an easy kick-out method with probably less ability to kind of, contend our decision. Is that the way you see it?
I agree. The background, although there are, as I said, ambiguous standards, background issues can be articulated a lot easier, I think, than once you're evaluating. Once everybody passes the threshold of the integrity standard, now it's not a question of are you qualified or not. It's who's more qualified, who has the better project, and I agree with you. That's going to be a more subjective evaluation.
And I think you answered the questions my colleagues had about, kind of the staffing requirement. I mean, this is a pretty thorough process of reviewing these applications. Have you seen this work where issuing the RFQs, setting a deadline for responses, has actually brought other potential applicants who may not be on the radar screen kind of to the surface, knowing that they have to apply if they're going to get into the mix?
No, I haven't, actually. It's not a comfortable process. As you see from the application, it's fairly intrusive into your personal and business life, and it's fairly costly. So it's not something that someone who will just take a flyer and say, hey, let me see if I qualify or not, would be too willing to do.
I mean, I think a lot of the comments we've gotten from local communities has been their effort to upfront a lot of costs in negotiating host community agreements, and maybe this saves them a little bit of money because, they can either step back from the process and let this kind of work itself through, or obviously they still have the luxury to continue to work with whoever their, the local project proponent is. But, finding a process that is more objective than subjective at this RFQ stage, I think, would be preferable.
Try to make it as objective as possible.
How do you, are you ready to go?
No, go ahead.
How do you, we don't want to preclude competition, and we want to leave the door open to as many bidders in all of our regions as possible. So do you have a cutoff point that makes it quicker? I mean, can people decide late in the game that they want to come in, or how?
No, I think the RFQ would be a similar process to an RFP. In other words, you'd issue an RFQ, and it would have a date certain on the time when all of these applications would need to be filed. They would request the application as part of the RFQ, and then there'd be a deadline for its submission, and that would be the cutoff. Those would be the people that you would be evaluating.
Because that seems to me, if circumstances on the ground change, the lay of the land is changing in Western Mass all the time, as I just tell by reading the news reports. Same happens in southeastern or in Foxborough, for example. And you could have a change in circumstances that would want to cause people to come into the business. You could even have a situation where somebody gets kicked out who was presumed to be very strong, and all of a sudden other people say, well, there's an opportunity for me that I didn't have. So could we do it in a way somehow that we keep it open, and that why would we want to put a cutoff date earlier than replying to the RFP?
Well, that's a policy decision you can make as to what the cutoff date would be, and it also would something we'd have to confer with the Massachusetts firm with in terms of how these can be issued, and if there's any Massachusetts restrictions on dates certain and so on. And certainly there would have to be some flexibility. I don't anticipate that it would be the case, but suppose all the applicants for one region fail in this first step. You can't leave a region uncovered.
Well, that's the kind of, so somehow or other, thinking about how to lock in that kind of flexibility and maximization of competition is important.
What's,
But if you,
oh, go ahead.
if you leave it open until the time of the RFP, then you lose the advantage of the bifurcated process, right?
Right, I would think you would, yeah.
Yeah, so it'd have to be some continuum if we went down this.
Or some condition on which you could reopen it
Right.
if such and such occurs.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
We could pre-qualify a number of people for some time, after which time we could open up another RFQ process if we so.
If you felt it was insufficient, if you felt that the responses you got were insufficient or you know, as I think a typical RFP process so allows for that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we do have a date looming the end of October to issue an RFP for Southeastern Mass, unless, you know, a tribal gaming
Unless
pact
tri-
is reached.
That's right.
To try to be fair to obviously all three regions, what are your thoughts on the issuance of
Well,
an
we don't
RFQ
see
in
the,
that scenario?
well, we wouldn't see the RFQ as independent of the RFP. It's a part of the RFP process.
Right.
So by issuing the RFQ on or by October 31st, I think you'd be in compliance with the requirement that the RFP be issued, because this is part of the RFP process.
Okay.
That's a really important point, and that leads me to a thought that I and Stan have had. There are other things, there are a variety of things that are pegged to the RFP. An application fee, for example.
Right.
Which is not huge, but it's not chump change for most people. And I think Stan said also the establishment of the license fee.
Right.
So I don't know, you know, I have no reason to think we'll know what we think the minimum license fee should be sooner than later. That's one of the things we're doing all this research to try to figure out, you know, what kind of license fees make sense. Mm-hmm. And there probably are others, and are there other things that are tied to that trigger point that we need to think through if we're gonna think about doing this quite a bit sooner than we had thought?
Right now, I don't, I'd have to go back and check and see, but I don't think you'd be, I think as long as you I think it would be fairly characterize this RFQ as part of that RFP process, then those other dates fall in line, as they would had this been the full RFP.
Well, that works if we don't mind having those dates move forward. Like maybe we don't mind the application fee being moved forward. But moving forward, our decision on what the minimum license fee is going to be, well, I guess the minimum license fee is determined.
That's in the
Yeah,
statute.
the minimum is determined, but whether it's going to be higher than that. If I heard you, is that right, Stan? So we need to look really, really hard.
We'll do
at,
that.
are there any other linkages pegged to that date that cause an issue for us?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can work our way around, maybe the language will let us work our way around that issue of the license fee.
We'll do that as part of the submission that we give you. We'll identify those as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Question, in your experience with other jurisdictions with an RFQ, what time frame is for an applicant to make application for an RFQ? What have you seen as a time frame that someone would have once we would announce this part of the process?
Again, for the type of companies that are expressing their interest in Massachusetts, they have these things basically on file, and a lot of them could whip them out in a space of 30 days. For those who are new to the process, it might take twice as long, but it would not. I would think they'd be able to submit something within 60 days.
And what about a review process? What is your experience with?
We've estimated, and again, it's just an estimate, as I said before, depending on the issues that might arise, but about 6 months.
What about what sort of regulations it would be incumbent upon this commission to issue, if any, prior to the issuance of these RFQs?
The regulations, and again, that's going to be part of the strategic plan, would include the forms themselves would be regulatory, they'd be in the regulations, and the scope of licensing regulation, in other words, who are the qualifiers, who needs to be the ones who file, what are the standards, what are the thresholds for the qualification, and then administrative regulations as to where they're filed, what, and so on, very, housekeeping type regulations.
Can the regulations
And they
for
could
the
be-
RFQ be filed, be created separately from the regulations from the RFP, or is that part of a package?
Well, subject to the advice from the Massachusetts Council, I would think they could be. We would hope that they could be, because they would be done on an emergency basis and would need to be done first.
But I take it there are other jurisdictions that use this bifurcated process.
Well, in a way, there aren't that many jurisdictions that have, Massachusetts is unique in a number of ways. There are other jurisdictions that have this selection type process where you have regions and there's going to be only one casino in those regions and you evaluate prospects. That Pennsylvania, for example, has that system. But I'm not aware of any that had language in its statute like you have in 12C and that handles them specifically this way. There may be jurisdictions that administratively handle them this way. In other words, they go through the background first before they waste their time evaluating the project if it might be a waste of time. But Massachusetts is unique because of the local approval aspects, which are laudable, but they give you, they make the process much more complicated, and they all the more argue in favor of getting the integrity issues out of the way first. And I'm not aware of any of other jurisdictions that have that local approval, and so I don't know of any other jurisdictions that bifurcate in such a delineated way. They do it administratively. You know, the agency itself will decide to prioritize the background before it does the.
I see.
Yeah.
But are there, in connection with that administrative bifurcation, are there sets of regulations that say we do this and then we do this? Something,
No.
I'm looking to see whether there's
Right, no.
something we can,
No, no, there isn't any, it would all be as a matter of administrative policy. It would not be regulatory and say, first, we're going to, this is what we're going to do on this kind of time frame. Many of the gaming regulatory agencies don't like to be constrain themselves with a time frame that says we're going to have to do this first and then we're going to do this next.
but if we went this way, I'm just thinking about timelines again and trying to think about prioritizing activities. We've talked about prioritizing creation of the bureau so you can support this when it gets in.
Right.
Yeah, we would have to have some kind of a set of regulations that govern this bifurcated process, at least the front end of it, right, the RFQ piece. And then we'd have to have a set of regulations that govern the RFP process. I don't know how extensive that'd be, but the statutory criteria are extensive, so that's a start. So at least the RFQ regs be something we need to think about
Yes.
early,
Yes,
right?
and then what I was trying to say earlier, probably not clearly enough, was that they would be separate sets of regulations, the
Right.
RFQ and the
Right,
RFP,
right,
but that
right.
they wouldn't need to be promulgated
Yeah,
at the same time.
I hear you.
Okay.
Do you have an order of magnitude of cost? What kind of cost are we talking about here?
For the agency or for the?
No, for the no, for us to
Yeah.
process the RFQs.
I,
Or per entity?
Again, I don't, it varies so because of the size and scope of each entity's application or the amount of time that would be required. Many jurisdictions, and I don't see anything, for example, in your statute that would preclude you from setting, when you establish your fees, to charge by the hour. And to have the applicant pay on a not on a flat fee basis, but on the basis of how long it took you to handle their application. If they delay, or if they make things more difficult for you, or if they don't answer your phone calls, and it requires much more effort on your part, then it's not unusual to have them pay for that. Well, your fee regulations would not be X dollars, but they would be X dollars per hour per investigative cost.
And when would you envision, if we decided to really go for this hell-bent for leather, when would we reasonably be able to get the RFQ out the door?
Well, we're now looking at the 16 weeks for the strategic plan, and at the conclusion of that strategic plan, we think we would have the proposal for what it would look like and what the regulations would look like, and the commission could institute a time frame immediately thereafter when it could be issued.
Is there a reason why the RFQ has to await the full strategic plan?
There are a lot of interlocking aspects of this that if we wanted to, at this point, we hadn't contemplated doing it that way. If the commission would like to, we can restructure how we've kind of timed the strategic plan work so that we would prioritize this to get it out sooner, if that's what you'd prefer. I mean, it's just a question of identifying what we would need for that and doing that first before we do the rest of it.
Right. Well, I think it's worth talking about with people who know more about this than I do at this point, but the gesture of accommodating people's wish for speed, if it can be done in a way which does not compromise our work, and that's the point that Commissioner McHugh was talking about, you know,
Sure.
efficiently but deliberately. It's certainly not worth, you know, screwing things up, but it's worth thinking about whether that is something that we could get out so people could be working on it while we are going about our business of completing the strategic plan and preparing the RFP and doing our background research and so forth. I don't know if that's a good, bad, or indifferent idea, Guy, but it's something
Okay.
I think we'd like to have looked at. I don't think we're, at this stage of the game, we're not invested in any particular sequencing of the strategic plan.
Right.
You guys probably know more about that than we do.
Right. Well, we were basically timing it on the basis of what we could get done, assuming that we would need all of it done by the end of the 16 weeks,
Right.
and what time it would take for each of it. But if you desire something to be done before the end of the 16 weeks, that's something, we'll just do it.
Does anybody else have
Well,
thoughts?
I'm not, I remain concerned about this combination of deliberation and speed. But it seems to me that even if we didn't have a fully panoplied process in mind, even by the end of the 16 weeks, if we, as a policy matter, decided we were going to go that route, that decision, it seems to me, in and of itself, would be of great assistance to the cities and towns, because they would know that step one was going to come before they had to go to the expense of step two. And so I'm not sure that we'd have to have the RFQ process in place to get an advantage out of a decision to use the RFQ process, is what I'm saying.
Well, I think that's a good point, but also we could think, we could, if these two standard forms have been used by multiple jurisdictions and have probably 90% of what we're gonna want, we could get these out and get people started, and then the other 10% could be added later on. There's nothing to say we couldn't add to this. So it's just worth thinking about. You know, I'm very sensitive to what, and I have an instinct to go too fast, so I'm completely in favor of balancing perspectives. But I think it's worth thinking carefully about what constructive good could come out of resyncing these.
Whichever way you decide to go, we could accommodate that.
What about the Massachusetts type additional form, which could conceivably take us longer to produce and think about from a policy standpoint?
Well,
could it be, I guess my question is, could those forms be issued separately? Or do we lose efficiencies really because now we have a bifurcated RFQ process?
No, those forms
ought to be-
would be issued with these. There'd be a totally different form as far as the RFP is concerned and the submission of the details of the project and the development. But and that would not be a standard that, that is, we take that from the statute, and that's not available on any kind of multi-jurisdictional basis. But these forms can be massaged and a Massachusetts supplement created. If you decide that you want to do it before the 16 weeks, that could be done.
Okay.
Yes.
It sounds like you may be suggesting this process, and at the same time, we'd be working on standing up the Bureau, making decisions about outsourcing. There is no downside that you can see with making this decision and working toward this at the same time, not having all the decisions made about the Bureau, the investigative end of things?
Well, not other than what we talked about earlier in terms of how you anticipate staffing the investigative process. If you were going to entirely do it in-house with BIA Bureau investigators, the expedited time frame that you're talking about now would probably not be feasible. But if you want to do it on an expedited time frame and are willing to do subcontracting or other forms, other forms, not just Bureau, but state police, I'm sure would be involved in this too, and staffing, getting the staff from the state police and so on. If it's possible to get those people on board quickly enough, it could be done, but it probably would be difficult. So your time frame would hinge on your decision on a matter of policy as to how you want to staff it.
What kind of firms do this type of work on a contract basis?
There are investigative firms that that do background checks, that employment background checks, substantially of large firms, former FBI agents who have formed firms like this, former state police, government investigators from many agencies. They do employment backgrounds for government, and they do these kinds of licensing. Pennsylvania used those. Other jurisdictions, I'm trying to think of. There are a number of emerging jurisdictions that used private investigators.
I'm aware of individuals who have worked in New Jersey and other places, and they have great experience with these kinds of investigations, and they've gone from jurisdiction to jurisdiction as consultants working in this, doing this work.
And they're big outfits like Kroll that I'm sure.
There's Kroll,
do this kind of
absolutely.
stuff.
Right.
Right.
In viewing Massachusetts, the way this law is set up is obviously unique to other jurisdictions. The minimal level of investment certainly means we're not having fly-by-night casino operations be an applicant. Many of obviously, again, these firms are publicly traded. Have you ever seen an RFQ process with those types of entities where somebody's been kicked out?
Well, it wasn't in an RFQ process, but in New Jersey, in their initial applications, Playboy was denied a license. They were publicly traded. Caesars was initially denied a license. They're publicly traded. Bally was initially denied a license. They're publicly traded. And Hilton was initially denied a license, and they're publicly traded. So, yes.
I guess.
It was a good long way to get around.
Right. So, does it make sense, do you think, everybody, to ask the consultant to take a real hard look at it and say, if we were going to try to fast-track this piece, how would we do it? What are the issues? What are the consequences? And come back to us next week if you can, and
Okay.
work on that?
As long as we're simultaneously looking at our options for investigative work, because I think one decision hinges on the other.
Right,
So we
and
have
that'd be
to-
part of the
Yes.
answer. Okay.
I would also be interested in that proposal at looking, okay, now how does the calendar lay itself out for issuing RFQs, receiving RFQs, RFPs, et cetera, as well as obviously their scope of work. But I'm interested in seeing it as an objective tool as possible.
It seems like this,
For the RFQ
the
process.
primary savings here is if we don't do the RFQ portion until we're ready to do an RFP. Let's say we're ready to do an RFP in November. Just pick a date. If we ever started, all the time that's involved in that RFQ process would then start in November, and now that'll be behind us. So whether it's you know, a minimum of 2 months to a maximum of 6 months, we're talking about a pretty substantial savings of time by doing it this way.
And is a fast track, this idea of issuing an RFQ prior to the conclusion of the strategic plan? Is that the notion?
Yeah,
Or is the
'cause
fast track just the notion of issuing the RFQ and then the RFQ?
Well, that's a good point. We actually probably have two questions on the table. One is, do we want them to tell us, propose a system that it has the bifurcated system?
Correct.
I think we're pretty clear
I think
that
that's
we do
pretty clear.
want that, yeah.
Yes.
And in addition, now, we're saying,
Okay.
if we were to move that up and do it as soon as possible, or as soon as reasonably possible, what would the trade-offs be? What would the
Right,
issues and
with
trade-offs be?
the staffing and bumping up against any other deadlines and so on.
Well, and again, it's a schedule, and I'm mindful of schedules we've talked about, but if you talk about a 3-month process to respond to an RFQ and a 6-month process of reviewing the RFQs, where does that kind of space it out before, and where does the RFP kind of fall into place?
Okay.
I think this is fine, and we ought to go down this path and look at it. But I'm mindful of the fact that we don't have any staff at the moment. B, we're talking next week, and I very much doubt that I'm going to be in a position to make a go, no-go decision next week. And C, there are a whole series of interlocking considerations that a carefully drawn plan that I'm sure we'll get will take into account. And a number of decision trees in that plan that are going to make other decisions possible or impossible. So I think that we ought to explore this. I think it's really an important idea and can save the cities and towns a lot of money and can save everybody a lot of money. But I don't want to get into a process where we're so beguiled by the goodness of the idea that we overlook some of the detail to make it, that's necessary to make it succeed. So that comes back to this refrain, I guess, that I've been uttering since the beginning, but I do think we ought to take a look at it but those are my concerns.
We certainly have no objection if you give us more time to do this. That would be, that would be fine. If it's 2 weeks instead of 1 week, I think we probably could do a more thorough analysis.
Yeah, I'm sorry, don't let me push you on that. I didn't,
Okay.
you tell me when you think the appropriate time is to look at this in a really serious and thorough way. If that's 2 weeks, that's fine.
Yeah, let us try to do it in 2 weeks.
Okay, that's fine.
Well,
Sorry.
I'm also curious as to the status of the strategic plan. I mean, that's, how is that, how are we on those 16 weeks, which I share Commissioner
we haven't
McHugh's
started.
points? Okay,
We don't have our statement, we don't have a contract.
okay.
He's volunteering today.
But I know they've spent, you know,
No,
I
not
know they've
yet.
spent some time.
Sorry.
I know they spend a lot of time at this, thinking about these, and, you know, maybe thinking about when that 16 weeks would conceivably start is really the question that I should be asking.
Well,
That's when you tell us to.
Well, it's the 16 weeks starts when we've negotiated the contract.
Okay.
And we're gonna be working on that as quickly as we can, and that's where Stan and Kathy O'Toole are now in touch and starting to work on this. So, but it's not a minor contract, so it's gonna take a little while, but it's not rocket science either.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, anything else? Is there any reason not to do it, Guy? Whenever the right time to do it is, maybe there's reasons not to speed it up, but is there a school of thought that we're missing that says doesn't make sense?
We've given it a lot of thought, and we really don't see, I mean, you could probably stretch it and probably think of some insignificant reason, but it would be overwhelmed by the positive aspects of it.
Okay. Great.
I happened to have a conversation at our forum the other day with a municipal representative that was there, and kind of barring any details, the local official I talked to didn't seem to have any reason not to go in RFQ, but that was absent, some of the fine print.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it, Guy.
Thank you.
Happy to volunteer.
Thank you. Maybe we could pick up your flight or something. I'm going to suggest a 5-minute facilities break. Community college follow-up, 9C. I don't know if there really was much here. We talked a little bit more about, maybe being quite proactive about trying to get them to think really big about this idea.
Well, I had some follow-up with Holyoke Community College President Bill Messner, who's kind of taken the lead, I think, among the community colleges, as well as President Rubenshall, who we talked with. I think we want to kind of begin to figure out what other entities should be at the table. I mean, you have regional employment boards, you have one-stop career centers, all located around the state. And, we recently got an email, which I think you sent around to us, an interested member of the public who highlighted a number of reports, but one that I found was interesting was that the Fed Reserve had done on a number of impoverished communities. My hometown of Springfield made that list in that study group, but they also looked at Atlantic City and some target neighborhoods in Atlantic City, and one of the reasons they said the unemployment had grown was because there hadn't been adequate training to upgrade the skills of local residents to be, viable candidates for the jobs. And this gets back to our original point of, the bill's created to create jobs in Massachusetts. Should we be looking, and obviously, we know we want to partner with the community colleges, how that partnership works out, but give local residents a chance to be qualified applicants for the positions wherever these casinos decide to site. So, do we reach out to some of the hospitality schools? I know UMass Amherst has a hospitality school. Commissioner Zuniga and I met with representative of Local 26 from Unite Here. I mean, I'd like to work with Stan to try to begin to flesh out who some of these parties are and begin to look proactively towards what a job training program could be to, again, give Massachusetts residents the skill base they need to be potential hirees for some of the casinos.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I don't know whether we might need, we have 2 or 3 kinds of projects like this, a little bit. I mean, like the relationship with the tourism industry is something where we could use help. Maybe we want to think about getting somebody to be the point person on this kind of an initiative. I don't know.
Okay.
It's definitely worth thinking about it.
Okay.
What was I going to say about this? But I think it's I know what, there's just your having read the Federal Reserve study, we don't want to be in the situation where we're simply a party to people yelling back and forth that these create poverty. No, they don't. And having us begin to understand, like you now do, this relationship, between proper training for the people in these communities is great. I mean, that's really a great insight and the kind of stuff that we really need to get our arms around.
Well, and, it kind of goes without saying, there are other sectors of the economy in Massachusetts that do really well, that really starve for qualified talent to work for them. And some reason it's, a suitable reason for them to decide where they're going to locate. I mean, because, we've created a market and we have an opportunity for a casino interest to come into Massachusetts, we still want them to find the qualified workforce available to them so they're not having to, import, employees from other, jurisdictions or people that have done this work elsewhere. We want, our local residents to have just as suitable a shot at those job opportunities as they will.
Great. Anything else on that topic? The advisory committee schedule, I think you referred to, right? That's.
Yes, I have a draft of that schedule.
Great.
There are 7 such groups, and I'll look at it, and I expect to have it distributed to everybody by tomorrow or Thursday.
Great. Charitable gaming. We were going to be thinking about how we get this project done.
Right. I went with Commissioner Zuniga yesterday to meet with the folks at the Treasury. We met with the director of the lottery, and we met with the lottery staff down there to talk about their role as tax collectors and regulators. They're the Beano regulators, They don't regulate the bazaars and raffles, but they do collect taxes from those. And we had a good discussion with them. We've asked them for additional information. We're going to spell that out. They're glad to give it to us about revenues and licenses and what they're involved in and some ideas they have for changing the way the regulatory framework works, although mainly it's statistical data that they have. We've met with the Attorney General, and the Attorney General, I followed up with one of the Assistant Attorney Generals last week at the May 3rd forum. They're going to send us some memoranda that they have that deal with this subject. We've also been advised to talk to the city, representatives of the city and town clerks who actually issue the licenses, and to talk to a couple of groups who represent those who participate in the gaming, who run these games, charitable groups that run these games. And we could do that either by reaching out to them or by having some kind of a public forum in which we invite them to come in. There's not that much more that we need to do in order to get the raw materials from which to make a judgments, to begin to make some judgments about whether any changes are needed. And then I think an approach would be to get the major players, the folks from the lottery, the AG's office, us, maybe a representative or two of the municipal associations and others together to think through what an ideal framework would look like, write that down, and put that up to the legislature as our recommendation. So I think we can make I have no doubt that we can make the July 31st deadline. And I also think that the assumption of responsibilities that we face on July 31st is not going to impose on us a significant workload. To the extent we have any role in the Beano regulation, that looks like it's humming along and has been for years in the lottery domain. And to the extent that we have some responsibility for the others, I think that well, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I don't think that will be a difficult thing to do either. So I'm confident that we can, with not an enormous amount of effort, and I know you were concerned about that with all the other things we had to do, without an enormous amount of effort, I'm confident that we can create a report that's thorough and careful and has good recommendations and has a consensus behind it, all within the time frame without interfering with our other duties. Commissioner, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but
no, actually very little. You just mentioned the associations that we could meet with, the Police Chief Association and the City and Towns Clerks Association are two particular ones that, given their role, are good people to meet with. But that's essentially the only thing that I would add.
And you don't, I keep asking this and I keep getting the answer, but you don't feel like you need a staff person to be the drafter of first resort or a researcher?
I think not, Mr. Chairman. I just don't think it is all this complicated. There is basically one statute. The regulatory framework is pretty straightforward now. The Beano statutes are 4 sections of the general laws. That's a little bit more complicated, but well in hand, and it has a lot of sort of understood regulatory aspects. And I think that this is going to be something we can do without staff. But we'll know that in another few weeks, and we'll have plenty of time to seek a staff person if we need.
Fine.
Another assumption that I may add is that given technology and data compilation that is now so much easier, really, there's a component there that we could benefit from as we prepare this report. Well, for example, they were mentioning yesterday how to monitor the activity of the Beanos, they look, among other things, at some of the news clippings at the lottery, just to understand the level of activity and do some of the audits that they do. It occurs to me that there's a technology solution, to that as an alternative.
Right. So. Okay, well, that's great. Should we, if we were going to use should we use one of these meetings for these folks to come in?
That might be worthwhile to do, and let us talked to a couple of groups, and let me see if I can get the material from the lottery, the material from the Attorney General, and establish some kind of a liaison with a couple of these groups that conduct them, and with the Association of City and Town Clerks who issue the, well, Association of Town Clerks, I guess, and the Association of City Clerks. I think it's two associations.
Yes.
And see if I can't get them to, and maybe have one afternoon where we spend a couple hours with these folks and hear about this, and then wrap it up.
Just after we take the trip to Southern.
Right after we get back from that. Right.
Okay, great. Anything else on that? Assistance to municipalities, we have stricken, talked about that a little bit. The research agenda, actually, maybe this is also something that either, well, maybe, is there just, does anybody remember, I didn't bring the statute, is there just one section that refers to research, or, I'm thinking that research tasks are kind of marbled throughout the legislation, like all these advisory committees. Do you have a sense of that?
I don't.
Yeah.
But I certainly can find that out. I didn't think they were marbled throughout the statute. I thought there were a couple of discrete places where they are, and they are easily identifiable, but I can't identify them right now.
Okay. If you could ask the lawyers, or if it's easy for you to do it, have you do it, but just to double check, I think I would feel more comfortable if
All
I
right.
also had that on a Gantt chart somewhere
All
where
right.
we knew what we were supposed to be doing.
All right.
And also, I don't know the extent to which it relates to the research we're gonna be doing on our own anyway, to try to learn how to make
Right.
these decisions. Okay. I think that's it. Anything else that we didn't touch? Okay.
One item that I guess falls under the general area, and I forgot to mention this a minute ago, Mr. Chairman, of assistance from municipalities and also responses for information from various members of the public. There is a statute that deals now with contributions by applicants for licenses. And the Office of Political and Campaign Finance is thinking of issuing regulations. And I think that we ought to be involved in the commentary on that, and wonder if we couldn't take steps to reach out to them and make sure that our voice is heard, and see what their thinking is. The statute's a little bit ambiguous in that it doesn't talk about when a person becomes an applicant. I mean, one can take the position that you become an applicant when you put the application on the table, but that doesn't focus on the run-up to that, when the preparations are being made and everybody knows that you're going to be an applicant. And so how? Is that just unregulated? Should it be regulated? If so, how? When should it start? I think Commissioner Stebbins has some of the same questions and has been hearing some of the same questions. So I think we ought to reach out to that office and see if we can't be heard on what the regulations are, because they could be very helpful here in clarifying an ambiguous situation.
I think that's a definite, the definition that you just picked up on of applicant, but this intervening period when there's a lot being done at the local level, we want to give, I think, some guidance or direction to local officials, again, with our friends at the MMA, to give direction to local elected officials in terms of, accepting a contribution or not.
Does this
It's
extend to
kind of a
the issue?
volatile period.
Does this extend to the issue of the extent to which somebody should be overseeing money that bidders spend? I mean, I know there are limitations on contributions, campaign contributions they can make, but there's been talk about having us come up with something that would require bidders to reveal how much money they've used in their local work? Does it extend to that topic?
Well, it might all be part of the same conversation.
Yeah,
The campaign finance folks may not want to include that in their regulations, but we might want to include it in our regulations.
Right.
On the other hand, they might want to include that in their regulations, and then it would simply be redundant to have it in ours. So I think it's a conversation
Yeah.
that has all of those components.
right. Okay, that'd be great. Are you comfortable taking the lead on that?
Sure.
Okay, and then, at some point, maybe we all want to be
Right,
involved in the
right, right.
conversation.
No, I think everybody has to be at
Right,
some point.
and we might want to have, maybe there are people out there who would have views on this that we would want to have come in.
Right.
And talk to us as a group also. But I think that's a really important thing to think through. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other issues? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 He's going to take a 2-minute break, and then we'll answer a few questions about Bach or whatever else.